The ornate Rizian hall went deathly silent as Stephen's forceful words rang out, his voice rising in volume and intensity as he thundered, "If aliens are supposedly so enlightened, why do you still practice slavery of the body and the mind, with cruelty matching the barbaric tyrants of old Earth?" The assembled alien ministers gawked in shock and outrage. Some burst out in furious indignation, but Stephen slammed his fist on the podium, silencing them. "You speak of peace, and yet your fleets mass at our borders, ready for war. You call humans aggressive upstarts, and yet it is you who are the expansionist warmongers." It was only mere weeks ago that 18-year-old Stephen Warren had landed on the Rizian capital world of Rizia Prime with wide-eyed enthusiasm, brimming with idealism. He had been the first human ever selected to study abroad at the prestigious Rizian Cultural Exchange University, a historic chance to learn from one of the most technologically advanced alien civilizations and build bridges of cooperation between humanity and the influential Rizians. But Stephen quickly discovered the rotten truth behind the Rizians' facade of enlightened benevolence, a society that was rigidly hierarchical, oppressive, and stagnant, lorded over by stern spiritual autocrats known as sire fathers, whose word was absolute law. Merely questioning Rizian doctrine could land one in a brutal re-education camp or worse. Stephen faced unrelenting harassment and discrimination from his Rizian peers, who sneered at him, calling humans barbarians and uncultured warlike upstarts. Studying Rizian history and culture, Stephen realized the grim pattern. The Rizians would find a less advanced alien civilization, dominate them economically and culturally, under the guise of enlightening them, and gradually absorb them into the Rizian Empire, by force if needed. And now they had set their sights on humanity and the resource-rich worlds the Terrans had painstakingly colonized. Tensions had reached a boiling point between the Terran Alliance and the Rizians over disputes on trade, territory, and Rizian ships brazenly crossing into human space. The future of human-Rizian relations, and quite possibly a devastating interstellar war, hinged on the outcome of this summit, called to negotiate a peaceful resolution between the two powers on the very cusp of hostilities erupting. Now, as the first human to ever speak before the assembled Rizian leadership, Stephen had a monumental choice to make: tone down his speech as his horrified human colleagues urged, appeasing the Rizians but abandoning humanity's interests, or to speak the full, unyielding truth about the rot festering in the Rizian Empire, exposing their hypocrisy and cruelty for all to see. In the greatest gamble of his young life, Stephen Warren chooses to defy his Rizian hosts and his own government, risking all to speak truth to power, no matter how much fury it will provoke. For if his words are heeded, he could avert a catastrophic war, shake the very foundations of Rizian civilization, and change the destiny of humanity and the galaxy forever. And if he fails, he will doom humanity to a massive conflict it may be unable to win against the awesome might of the Rizian war machine. The ultimate fate of humanity, the Rizian Empire, and the galaxy itself now rests upon the courageous words of one human student, standing alone but undaunted before the alien dignitaries as the seconds tick down to the outbreak of total war. Stephen's heart pounds in his chest as he strides up to the podium, the eyes of the gathered Rizian leadership boring into him. He takes a deep breath, his hands gripping the sides of the lectern. The grand auditorium is utterly silent, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Esteemed sire fathers, distinguished leaders of the Rizian collective, my fellow diplomats from the Terran Alliance, Stephen begins, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. We stand here today at a pivotal moment in the history of our civilizations. A moment that offers the opportunity for greater understanding and cooperation between our peoples. Stephen pauses, his gaze sweeping across the alien faces before him. Some look intrigued, others skeptical. The most senior sire fathers stare at him with thinly veiled disdain. Yet I must speak hard truths today, Stephen continues, his tone growing forceful. Truths that may be difficult to hear, but are vital to confront if we are to build a future of peace and progress. Stephen outlines the injustices he has witnessed in Rizian society, the brutal suppression of dissent, the rigid caste system that stifles individual potential, the unquestioning obedience demanded by the Sire Fathers. His voice rings with conviction as he argues that such a system is unsustainable, that without the freedom to question, innovate, and evolve, the Rizian collective risks stagnation and decline. Gasps and murmurs arise from the Rizian delegation as Stephen unleashes his verbal barrage. Some look genuinely shocked, as if hearing these criticisms voiced aloud for the first time. Others hiss in outrage, their features contorted with anger. Stephen presses on undaunted. He highlights the Rizians' aggressive military posturing, their bullying of weaker alien races. Pulling up hollow displays, he presents damning evidence of Rizian warship buildups, of atrocities committed against indigenous populations on conquered worlds. I warn you today, this path leads only to destruction, Stephen exclaims, his eyes blazing. If the Rizian collective does not embrace reform, if it does not extend the enlightened values it claims to represent to all sentience, then it will sow the seeds of a catastrophic war that will consume the galaxy. The auditorium erupts in bedlam. Rizian dignitaries leap to their feet, shouting in protest. The human diplomats watch in stunned disbelief, some burying their faces in their hands. Sire Father Valen, his aged face purpling with rage, points a clawed finger at Stephen. "Insolent child!" he roars. "You dare slander the Rizian way of life? The Terran Alliance must denounce this impudent creature and apologize immediately." Stephen faces the Sire Father, his chin held high. "I dare speak the truth, Sire Father Valen. If you dispute my words, then let us debate openly the merit of my arguments and the evidence I have presented, unless you fear that your doctrine cannot withstand honest scrutiny." A collective gasp goes up from the crowd. Never has anyone, let alone a mere youth, challenged a Sire Father in such a manner. Valen's eyes narrow to slits, his frame quivering with barely contained fury. But he does not answer Stephen's challenge. In the aftermath, all hell breaks loose. The Rizian delegation storms out in protest. Terran diplomats hurl recriminations at Stephen, accusing him of recklessly sabotaging years of careful negotiation. Yet in the coming days, as a bootleg recording of Stephen's speech spreads like wildfire across the galactic net, it becomes clear his words have struck a chord. Across Rizian worlds and beyond, long simmering resentments against authoritarian rule boil to the surface. Whispered conversations in dimly lit backrooms, furtive messages passed on encrypted channels. The seeds of dissent and change have been sown, and a movement begins to take root in the shadows. Only time would tell if Stephen Warren's gambit would lead to a new era of freedom and progress, or a conflagration that would burn the stars themselves. The aftermath of Stephen's speech hit like a supernova. Within hours, Sire Father Valen's furious visage dominated every hollow screen across human space. His voice boomed with barely contained rage as he issued his demands to the Terran Alliance. "Expel this insolent whelp from your exchange program. Strip him of all diplomatic credentials." Valen's eyes blazed. "And you will apologize, publicly, or face the consequences." The Terran Alliance headquarters on Earth buzzed with frantic activity. Emergency sirens blared as top officials rushed to convene. Inside the war room, raised voices echoed off the walls. "We can't give in to their bullying," shouted Admiral Chen, slamming her fist on the table. "But the economic fallout," began Trade Minister Okafor before being cut off. "Principles matter more than profits," President Reyes said firmly. She took a deep breath. "We stand by our citizens' right to free speech, even if we disagree with what was said." As the Alliance broadcast their refusal to comply, Rizian ships across human space abruptly fired up their engines. Bewildered human dock workers watched as Rizian vessels disengaged, rising into the sky en masse. On Rizia Prime, war fever gripped the populace. Crowds thronged the streets, waving banners and chanting slogans denouncing humanity. "Death to the blasphemers," they cried. "Glory to the Sire Fathers." Even those Rizians who harbored doubts about their leaders found themselves swept up in the frenzy. Talus, a university professor, confided in his mate, "I fear where this may lead, but what choice do we have but to stand united?" Meanwhile on Earth, Stephen found himself at the center of a media firestorm. News drones swarmed outside his dorm as he tried to make his way to class. Fellow students either cheered or jeered as he passed. "You've doomed us all, Warren," one shouted. "Don't let them silence you," encouraged another. The dean summoned Stephen to his office, his face grim. "The government's breathing down our necks, son. They want you gone." But Stephen stood his ground. "I won't apologize for speaking truth to power, sir." That evening, Stephen sat in his room, fingers flying across his hollow keyboard, as he coordinated with his growing network of Rizian dissidents. "The cracks are showing in the collective," wrote one contact. "Your words gave voice to what many have long felt. We stand ready." Stephen allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger, but he knew in his heart that exposing the rot at the core of Rizian society had been necessary, whatever the cost. He would see this through to the end. As Stephen worked late into the night, warships gathered in the cold depths of space. Fingers hovered over launch controls. The galaxy stood on the precipice of chaos, awaiting the slightest spark to ignite the inferno. Stephen's words spread like wildfire across Rizian space. In dimly lit backrooms and encrypted comm channels, dissidents whispered his name with reverence. "Did you hear what the humans said?" they'd ask, eyes bright with newfound hope. "He spoke the truth we've all known but feared to voice." On Rizia Prime, Kala, a young factory worker, huddled with her comrades in a hidden basement. "We have to act now," she urged, her voice low but intense. "Warren's speech gives us the momentum we need." They worked through the night, printing pamphlets and coding data crystals with uncensored information. Meanwhile, in the gleaming halls of Rizian High Command, Admiral Zex pounded his fist on the war room table. "This Warren is no mere student," he snarled, pulling up holograms of intercepted transmissions. "Look at these patterns. He's clearly the linchpin of a sophisticated Terran plot to destabilize us from within." Sire Father Valen's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "Then we must strike first, and hard. Crush this insurrection before it takes root." On Earth, Stephen ducked into a dingy safe house, his heart racing. He'd narrowly evaded campus security again. His comlink buzzed. Another request for an interview. Despite the risks, he knew he had to keep speaking out. "The Sire Fathers would have you believe humans are warmongering savages," he told the reporter, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "But it's their regime that's built on oppression and lies." Suddenly, alarms blared across Geneva. The night sky lit up with searing plasma bolts as Rizian warships decloaked in low orbit. Defense platforms exploded in silent balls of fire. On the ground, panicked civilians ran for shelter as Rizian dropships screamed overhead. "We're under attack!" shouted Captain Reeves as she burst into Stephen's hideout. "Come with me if you want to live, kid." Stephen sprinted after her, ducking as chunks of masonry rained down from damaged buildings. They piled into a waiting hovercar, plasma bolts sizzling past them as they sped through the chaos-filled streets. In orbit, the battle raged. Human Vanguard destroyers, sleek and nimble, danced between the lumbering Rizian cruisers. "Fire solution locked," barked Commander Chen aboard the TAS Defiant. "Let 'em have it!" A spread of quantum torpedoes erupted from the Defiant's launch tubes, finding their mark with devastating precision. But for every Rizian ship destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The sheer numbers of the collective armada threatened to overwhelm Earth's defenses. On a Rizian colony world, Talus, the professor who'd harbored doubts, made his choice. He stood atop an overturned police skimmer, addressing a swelling crowd of protesters. "No more lies!" he shouted, his voice hoarse but determined. "We demand reform! We demand freedom!" The crowd roared its approval, surging forward to overwhelm the shocked Rizian security forces. Back on Earth, Stephen found himself whisked to a hardened bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Banks of holoscreens flickered with real-time battle data from across the galaxy. His eyes widened as he took in the scale of the conflict he'd inadvertently ignited. "This is your war room now, son," growled General Hawkins, clapping Stephen on the shoulder. "Your contacts in the Rizian underground might just give us the edge we need to survive this." Stephen nodded grimly, his fingers flying across a tactical interface as he relayed critical intel to human fleet commanders. The Rizian advance had been brutally effective, but now humanity was rallying, exploiting gaps in the enemy's overextended lines. A junior officer rushed in, breathless with excitement. "Sir, we're getting reports of uprisings on multiple Rizian worlds. Their forces are being pulled back to deal with internal unrest." For the first time since the invasion began, Stephen allowed himself a small smile. The tide was turning. The real battle, for the very soul of Rizian society, was just beginning. Stephen's fingers flew across the tactical interface, relaying critical intel to human fleet commanders. The tide of battle shifted as humanity exploited gaps in the Rizian lines. A junior officer burst into the war room, his eyes wide. "Sir, uprisings on multiple Rizian worlds. Their forces are pulling back to deal with internal unrest." Stephen allowed himself a small smile. The real battle for Rizian society was just beginning. Months passed. The war raged across inhabited space, Stephen's unlikely leadership proving instrumental. His intimate knowledge of Rizian society and connection to the resistance movement guided human strategy. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Chen watched Rizian ships retreat. "Push them back," she ordered. "Don't let up." Human forces surged forward, driving the invaders off-world, but as they celebrated this victory, a chilling transmission cut through the static. Sirefather Valen's face filled view screens, his eyes burning with hatred. "You leave us no choice, vermin," he snarled. "Behold the price of your defiance." Horrific footage played of entire human colonies reduced to ash by Rizian superweapons. Gasps of shock echoed through command centers. Stephen pounded his fist on the war room table. "We need to end this now," he said, his voice heavy. "I have a plan." He outlined his audacious strategy, a strike team to infiltrate the Rizian capital and capture the Sirefathers. Using his resistance contacts, Stephen guided the team through Rizian defenses. On Rizia Prime, chaos erupted. Kayla, the factory worker turned rebel, led a mob storming government buildings. "For Warren," they chanted. "For freedom!" Inside the capital's inner sanctum, Sirefather Valen stumbled, clutching a wound. "Activate the scourge," he wheezed to his aides. "Let the humans burn with us." Stephen's team breached the room, weapons drawn. Bodies of council members littered the floor. Valen's finger hovered over a pulsing red button. "Don't do it," Stephen shouted. But it was too late. Valen slammed his hand down, activating the doomsday weapon. Alarms blared as the scourge powered up, threatening to obliterate all life in the system. Stephen raced to the control panel, assessing the situation. He turned to his team, his face grim. "There's only one way to stop this," he said. "I have to stay behind and sabotage the core. Get out of here." His team protested, but Stephen stood firm. As they retreated, he worked feverishly to override the Scourge's systems. Warning lights flashed, the weapon's energy building to critical levels. With a final push of willpower, Stephen rerouted the power, causing a cascade failure in the Scourge's systems. The weapon imploded, taking Stephen with it in a blinding flash of light. Across Rizia Prime, rebels watched in awe as the Scourge fizzled and died. Word of Stephen's sacrifice spread like wildfire, galvanizing the resistance to victory. In the war's aftermath, humans and liberated Rizians alike mourned Stephen Warren. His courage had saved billions and ushered in a new era of freedom for the Rizian people. On Earth, a memorial service drew crowds from both species. Captain Reeves, who had saved Stephen during the initial invasion, addressed the gathering. "Stephen showed us the power of one voice speaking truth," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He gave everything so that humans and Rizians might have a chance at peace. Now it's up to us to honor that sacrifice. As the service concluded, a Rizian and a human child placed flowers together at the base of Stephen's statue, a symbol of hope for the future he had died to protect.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.